You're sitting at the kitchen table one morning, cup of tea in hand, working through a small pile of post you've been meaning to sort for about a week. Tucked between a flyer from your local council and a catalogue you never asked for sits an old pension statement you barely glance at anymore. It's almost the same one you opened when you first retired, and you've quietly trusted it ever since, the way your mum quietly trusted her own. But here's the strange thing about trust. Sometimes the system you trust is quietly holding money that genuinely belongs to you, and nobody ever bothers to knock on your door to tell you it was there. If this is your first time here on this channel, it is built especially for ordinary British people who want to understand the money side of getting older without any jargon and without any sales chats. So settle in, and if what we go through together today helps you in any small way, do tap the subscribe button below so that we can keep having these quiet chats together week after week. There are no clickbait headlines, no flashing graphics, no hard sell, just calm, kind, useful information made for people who have earned the right to a bit of dignity in how they're spoken to. The central idea of this whole video is simple, and I want you to hold it in your head from this moment until the very last sentence I say later on. Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the tax office we usually just shorten to HMRC, regularly has a small pile of money sitting there waiting that is genuinely yours and has been yours for quite a while. Whether you ever receive it depends almost entirely on whether you actually ask for it, in the right way, at the right time, to the right office. This is especially true for ordinary people over the age of 55 who have stopped working or who work far less than they used to. It is also true for couples, for widows, for widowers, and for anyone whose personal circumstances have quietly changed in the last few years. Let me walk you through 7 specific refunds and reliefs that older British adults frequently miss out on without ever knowing the money was there in the first place. I'll explain each one in the language of everyday life, with no clever jargon and no acronyms I don't immediately explain on first use. For every single point, I'll give you a small practical phrase worth writing down, because there is nothing more useful than a few simple sentences on a bit of paper by the kettle. Grab a pen now, because by the end of this conversation today, you'll have a small shopping list of phrases that will quietly save you real money over the years ahead. Even if you only act on 2 or 3 of them, the difference over a decade is likely to run into the low thousands of pounds, all of it sitting in the system waiting for you. The principle that holds it all together is this: HMRC is not the enemy. It is simply a quiet office full of forms and codes, and it gives back what it owes whenever you politely ask for it. Number 1 is the single most important one of the whole 7, and it is hiding in plain sight on that pension statement you haven't been properly looking at in some time. There is a quiet rule in the UK that says if you earn less than £3,600 a year, you can still pay up to £2,880 of your own money into a personal pension and have it boosted all the way up to £3,600 by the government. The way the rule works is this: your pension provider quietly adds 20% tax relief to whatever you pay in, because that's the basic rate of income tax you would have paid if you had been earning the same money as wages. For every £100 you put in, the taxman quietly adds £25, so a £100 payment becomes £125 in your pension pot within days. For £2,880 of your own money put in across a single tax year, that becomes a clean £3,600 in your pension, with no tax owed on any of it by anyone at all. This is officially called pension tax relief at source, which is a fancy phrase meaning HMRC tops up your pension contribution automatically because they would otherwise have taxed the same money at 20% in the first place. Most retirees never put any extra money in because they quietly assume pensions are only for people still in work, which is exactly the wrong assumption and a mistake that costs thousands over the course of a retirement. If your only income is the state pension and perhaps a small private pension, ask your pension provider whether your scheme accepts contributions from non-earners, because most of them do, even quite modest schemes from old jobs. If they say yes, set up a small standing order for whatever you can comfortably afford each month and let HMRC quietly top it up by 25% every single time you pay in, year after quiet year. For any of you watching whose husband, wife, or civil partner has stopped work, that non-working spouse can also have up to £2,880 of their own money, boosted to £3,600 a year, simply because the rules allow it. This little refund is a perfect example of the central theme of today's video, that HMRC quietly holds money you can politely claim back the moment you decide to ask for it. If this kind of quiet, honest chat is something you'd like to keep landing in your inbox, do make sure you've subscribed to the channel. It's a small moment for you, and it helps us more than you might think. Number two is something a great many British couples have quietly missed out on for years on end, and it goes by the simple name of the marriage allowance. In plain English, the marriage allowance is a small tax break that lets the lower earning partner in a marriage or civil partnership pass a small slice of their personal tax allowance. The amount of income you can earn before any tax is actually due over to the higher earning partner. It only really applies when one of you earns well below the personal allowance each year and the other earns comfortably above it, and on a basic level, it shifts roughly £1,000 of allowance from one of you to the other. The really important bit of this rule, and the bit that most people never hear about anywhere, is that you can backdate your marriage allowance claim for up to 4 full tax years, all the way back to the start of the current 4-year window. That means a couple who have never claimed before could be looking at a refund of over £1,000 landing quietly in their bank account if they simply fill in a short online form at gov.uk today. The 4-year backdating window is a quiet little gift sitting in plain sight on the government's website, and it is exactly the kind of refund almost no one ever sits down and explains to ordinary couples. This is one of those moments where a single afternoon spent filling in a single form can quietly recover money that has been sitting there for years, completely untouched, simply because you didn't know it existed. If you have been married for a while, if one of you is a pensioner on just the state pension, and if the other has a small wage or workplace pension, then please do check whether you have ever claimed this allowance at all. You can check in 2 or 3 minutes by going to gov.uk and searching for marriage allowance, where there is a short eligibility checker and a guided online form that takes about 10 minutes to complete. If it turns out you have missed out, the refund will be issued by HMRC quietly into your bank account, often within a few weeks, with no fuss and no forms to chase afterwards. Would a short message from me right now be too much to ask? If you have already subscribed, brilliant, and if you haven't yet, would today be the day? It's the gentle button just below this video. This is a quiet channel that relies on people like you simply telling other people like you, and your subscribing is the gentlest way you can help us keep going. Number 3 is one of those quiet situations where HMRC may have been gently overcharging you on your state pension for several years, and you simply didn't notice because nobody ever told you to look. Every year, the state pension goes up by something called the triple lock, a rule that makes sure it rises each April by the highest of inflation, average earnings growth, or 2.5%, whichever is largest. When the Department for Work and Pensions puts the increase through in April, sometimes HMRC's records don't quite catch up quickly enough, and they quietly keep taking a little too much tax off your weekly state pension payments for months on end. When this kind of mistake happens, HMRC will usually send you a P800 form a few months later, which is a simple letter explaining they have taken a touch too much tax and that they want to refund you, normally through a small adjustment to your tax code the following year. The trouble is, these P800 letters tend to arrive in late spring. They look a bit official and slightly confusing, and a great many people just file them unopened in the kitchen drawer year after year, never quite getting round to dealing with them properly. If you have had a P800 letter tucked away for weeks or even months, please, this week, go and open it carefully and read through every line, because if it says you are owed a refund, the instructions are usually very simple and very quick. That money has quietly been sitting in the system for months, waiting for you to say yes, and it ties straight back to the central idea of this whole video, namely that HMRC holds what is yours until you politely come to collect it. If your circumstances have changed recently, for example, if you have started drawing a private pension for the first time, or if you have retired fully from a part-time job, ring the HMRC income tax line and politely ask them to check whether your current tax code still matches your real life. A short phone call, often only 15 or 20 minutes if you have your national insurance number and your latest pension statements to hand, can quietly put right years of small overpayments that no one ever bothered to mention to you before. If you know an older relative, perhaps a parent or a sibling, who has been a bit puzzled by an official-looking letter in recent months, this might be the perfect moment to gently mention this kind of thing over a cup of tea. It is the kind of small kindness that quietly passes on something genuinely useful, and it costs nothing more than 10 minutes and a kind word. This is one of those little ways the channel quietly grows, through ordinary conversation like this one, and if you have not yet subscribed, a quiet tap of that button below is something the channel would genuinely be grateful for. Number 4 is a small relief quietly tucked inside the savings rules that applies to people whose only income is the state pension and a tiny bit of savings interest, and it is a relief that an enormous number of older savers simply never claim. There is something called the personal savings allowance, which in plain English lets basic rate taxpayers earn up to £1,000 of savings interest a year completely free of tax, and lets higher rate taxpayers earn up to £500 of savings interest a year before they owe anything at all. For people whose total income is so low that they don't even pay income tax at all, there is also something called the starting rate for savings, which simply means you can earn up to £5,000 of savings interest a year completely free of tax, as long as your other income is mostly the state pension and very little else. What this means in everyday life is that if you have a few £1,000s quietly sitting in a building society account or holding steady in premium bonds, you've almost certainly been quietly paying tax on the interest when you actually didn't need to at all. The refund of all those little bits of overpaid tax is quietly sitting there waiting for you to politely ask for it, usually through one short form, and most of these R40 claims don't have an upper time limit at all. It is one of those quiet refunds that people over 65 often miss out on for their entire retirement, simply because nobody ever sits them down and gently explains that they can fill in an R40 form and ask for every penny back. This is exactly the kind of thing HMRC does quietly, quietly waiting to hand back the money the moment you ask for it in the right way, and it ties perfectly into the central theme I keep returning to throughout this whole chat today. You can usually claim a refund of any tax that has been quietly taken off your savings interest by filling in an R40 form, which is a simple one-page form you can download from gov.uk and post back to HMRC, or complete it entirely online in just a few minutes if you prefer. There is no fee, no appointment, no queue at the post office, just a short form, a few figures from your savings statements, and a quiet wait of a few weeks for the refund to land in your bank account. If you have had savings of any kind for many years and have never once filled in an R40 form, would it be worth pulling up a recent statement from your building society and seeing whether the taxman has quietly been helping himself to a few pounds here and there? A small, simple form, a quiet refund, and once again HMRC quietly handing back money that was yours all along the moment you politely asked for it, which is exactly the heart of today's theme. If this kind of clear, plain English video is one you'd like to keep receiving, do make sure you're subscribed, because we make one of these gentle conversations every week for ordinary British people just like yourself. Number 5 is a slightly different kind of refund, and it is about simply checking your tax code carefully every single year, which is a tiny habit that can quietly catch small mistakes before they turn into quite large ones. Your tax code is the 3 or 4-digit number HMRC sends you, usually on a single sheet of paper near the start of each new tax year in April, that tells your employer or pension provider how much tax to take off your income before paying the rest over to you. If your tax code is wrong, which can happen for a long list of reasons, the code will quietly take either too much tax or too little tax from every single payment that follows, week after week, month after month. Wrong tax codes happen more often than you might think, and they tend to happen at exactly the moments when your circumstances quietly change. For example, when a spouse passes away, when you start drawing down a workplace pension, or when you finally retire from a long period of self-employment. The refund is simply sitting in the system waiting for you to ring HMRC up and politely ask them to correct the code on the spot, which on a phone call usually takes only 15 or 20 minutes if you have your national insurance number and your latest pension statements to hand. A small practical phrase worth writing on your bit of paper is this: check your tax code every April when the new one lands through the letterbox. And if the letters or numbers at the end don't quite match your actual situation, ring the tax office up and ask them to review it. Would it feel a little unfair to discover one day that you've been quietly paying a few £100s of extra tax a year for years on end, simply because nobody ever told you to glance at the code printed at the top of that annual brown envelope? Now, before I move on to the next quiet refund, let me tell you about a person, because stories stick in the memory far better than any list of rules ever does. And I want you to remember this one for a long time afterwards. Her name is Marjorie. She is 68. She lives alone in a small terraced house in Stoke-on-Trent, and she has been retired for nearly 5 years now from a long part-time job at a school canteen. Her only income these days is the full new state pension, which is roughly £10,000 a year, plus a small occupational pension from her earlier teaching work that pays her another £2,300 a year on top. For years, she quietly assumed she could no longer put any money into a pension simply because she wasn't working anymore, and so every month the £800 or so she receives just calmly covers her bills, her dog food, and her weekly shopping at the supermarket. The percent of her income that she ever thought about saving for later had quietly drifted down to almost nothing, and she assumed, like so many of her generation, that pensions were now simply closed off to people like her. One Tuesday in early March, her younger sister Anne, who happens to be a retired civil servant from down the road, comes round for tea and casually mentions that she has just put £2,880 of her own savings into a personal pension and that the government has quietly added another £720 on top. No questions asked, and simply because the rules say so. Marjorie goes quiet, then she laughs, the kind of soft laugh you laugh when you realise you've been quietly missing out for years because of an assumption you carried without ever really checking it with anyone qualified. The very next week, she rings up her old pension provider, asks whether her particular scheme will still accept contributions from a non-earner like herself, is told yes, of course, sets up a modest direct debit for £100 a month, and within the tax year, HMRC quietly boosts every single payment by 25%. By the end of that first year, Marjorie has politely put in £1,200 of her own money, and her pension pot has quietly grown by an extra £300 she never had to find or earn. Over the next few years, this quietly becomes a small monthly ritual, a habit that builds a little extra cushion for her later life without changing her weekly lifestyle at all. That one conversation over a cup of tea changed the shape of her retirement in a way no one in the system had ever bothered to mention to her before, and it is a real example of the central theme of this whole video. It is the kind of quiet refund that is sitting there for a great many ordinary people reading this, except that they don't yet know it exists. Marjorie didn't need a financial advisor, didn't need to learn any jargon, and didn't need to fill in anything more complicated than a single online form to set up the standing order. She also didn't have to chase anyone afterwards, because the top-ups quietly happened in the background week after week, year after year, without anyone making a fuss about them at all. A few years on, Marjorie has politely built up a small extra pot of pension money that she will eventually be able to draw on in some form, perhaps as a small extra annual income, perhaps as a tax-free lump sum, depending on the scheme's own rules. She often says with a quiet smile that she wishes someone had told her about this rule 10 years earlier, because she would have started the habit a full decade sooner and quietly ended up with several £1,000s more to her name by now. You don't have to be Marjorie to take advantage of this rule, you simply have to ask. Ask your pension provider, ask HMRC, and ask the question, because the answer is most likely already sitting in the system, quietly waiting for you, like it was for her. So the heart of Marjorie's quiet little story is not about rich rewards or clever schemes. It is about a gentle habit of simply asking the system for what is yours. For anyone watching who has been in a similar position for years, please don't beat yourself up about it, because the system itself is the kind of place that doesn't push information into your hand. You have to reach out and take it. It is also a reminder that what feels like a missing piece of information is often just a quiet conversation away from being sorted out for good. We still have a couple more gentle refunds to walk through together, alongside one final image that I hope will quietly stay with you for the rest of the week. Make sure you're subscribed, because in the second half of this video, we are going to share a couple more refunds and one final image that I hope might just stay with you. Number 6 is for couples where one of you was born before a certain date in the middle of the last century, and it is about something called the Married Couples Allowance that has been quietly available for decades now. This older allowance works in a slightly different way from the marriage allowance I mentioned earlier, and instead of giving you a direct cash refund, it gives you a small additional reduction in your annual tax bill through your tax code. The thing to know about it is good news, because you don't always have to claim it yourself. HMRC usually works it out from your marriage records and quietly adds it on automatically to your tax code every year. However, if you have recently changed your name back to a maiden name, If you have been widowed, or if for any reason you are unsure whether the allowance is currently showing on your record, a quick phone call to HMRC is the simplest way to make sure it isn't quietly being missed. Once again, the principle is the same one I keep returning to throughout this whole conversation, namely that HMRC quietly holds lots of small sums of money, but only releases them when an ordinary person politely asks for them. A practical phrase worth writing on your bit of paper by the kettle is this: ring the HMRC income tax line and politely ask whether you're currently receiving all the couple-related allowances your circumstances entitle you to, and let them walk through your own record with you while you are on the line. It is one of those quiet corners of the system where small but real sums can be quietly recovered just by being polite, asking, and waiting a few weeks for a refund that calmly arrives in your bank account. Number 7 is the one most people over 65 simply don't think about at all, and it is about 2 quiet refunds and reductions that sit outside HMRC, but still inside the same family of money quietly held back that ought to be released to ordinary pensioners across the country. If you are of state pension age, you are usually entitled to some form of council tax reduction, which is sometimes called council tax support, and which can quietly knock anything from 10% to a full 100% off your annual council tax bill, depending on your income, your savings, and the specific rules of your own local council. This is a refund claimed not from HMRC, but from your local council, and it can mean several £100s a year quietly refunded into your bank account, or quietly taken off your monthly direct debit without you having to do very much at all. On top of that, there is the Warm Home Discount Scheme, which can quietly knock around £150 off your winter electricity bill if your energy supplier is one of those signed up to the scheme, and if you receive the guarantee credit element of pension credit, or in many cases, simply if you receive the state pension on its own. These aren't strictly HMRC refunds, but they sit in exactly the same family of quiet money, waiting for ordinary pensioners to politely ask for it through the right form at the right office. If you have never once claimed council tax support, write this on your bit of paper today, ring your local council this week, and politely ask for a council tax reduction form. It is completely free, it is very quick, and the worst they can say is no, in which case you have lost nothing at all. This is the kind of quiet refinement at the edges of the system that can, over a long retirement, add up to a genuinely meaningful amount of money, all of it sitting there waiting for an ordinary person to politely ask. Now, let me gently bring this all back together, because we have walked through 7 quiet corners of the British system, and you have politely built up a small shopping list of phrases on your bit of paper by the kettle. The central theme of this whole video is, once again, that the British system, with HMRC at the centre of it, but with other corners, like your local council and your energy supplier close by, holds a number of small sums of money quietly waiting for older people to claim them. None of these refunds are headline grabbing, none will make you rich overnight, and none requires you to be a financial expert to receive. They simply require you to know they exist, to gather the right form, and to spend 20 or 30 minutes filling it in or making one short phone call to the right office. That single quiet habit, repeated every spring, is the lifelong ritual I would gently leave you with today, and it is also the heart of the hope-filled close I want to land on before I sign off. Before we get to that close, if you have enjoyed this conversation, do take a quiet moment to tap that subscribe button, because making these gentle videos takes time, and your subscription is what quietly keeps this whole thing alive. If anything in this conversation has quietly landed with you, and if there is one particular person in your own life who could really benefit from this kind of plain English information, perhaps an older parent, a brother or sister, or a next-door neighbour who lives alone, please do send this video their way as a small act of kindness. It costs you nothing more than a few seconds of your time, and it might be the very thing that quietly helps them find a refund they did not know was quietly sitting in their own name. We don't run any kind of advertising campaign here. We simply rely on ordinary people passing on good information to other ordinary people, which has always been the very best way this kind of knowledge quietly moves around the country. If you know someone who would quietly benefit from this, would a short message with the link be too much trouble for you this week? It is one of those small kindnesses that gently changes more lives than any big advertising campaign ever could, and it costs nothing more than the time it takes to write a single message. Now let me leave you with a small image, a quiet picture I'd like you to carry in your head for the rest of this week and beyond. Imagine a quiet English garden in late summer with a small wooden shed at the far end, the kind your dad probably had, slightly weathered by the rain, with a simple brass padlock on the door that has been there for years. Inside that shed, piled up on the old wooden workbench, are half a dozen small manila envelopes, all addressed in your own name, all unopened, all containing small sums of money that the postman quietly delivered to your door years ago, without anyone bothering to tell you they had even arrived. The shed isn't locked because the system secretly wants to keep the money from you. It isn't hidden because anyone is being cruel, and there is no villain anywhere in this small story at all. The envelopes are simply sitting there, quietly waiting for you to walk down the garden one calm afternoon, slide the padlock open with your own key, and pick them up one by one with your own hands. That walk down the garden is the moment of asking, which is the quiet moment when you ring HMRC, fill in the R40 form, claim the backdated marriage allowance, request the council tax reduction, or simply tell your pension provider to start topping up your monthly contributions. It is a small, gentle act, never a fight, never an argument, simply a polite request, and what waits at the end of that gentle walk is always your own name on the envelope, with your own quiet money waiting patiently inside. Take care of yourself this week, take care of the quiet people around you, and remember that the system isn't always against you. Sometimes it is simply waiting for you to ask. You deserve every single penny that quietly belongs to you, and the whole quiet point of this conversation today was to gently remind you of that one calm, certain truth. The kettle is still warm, your bit of paper is on the table, and the garden shed is quietly waiting for you whenever you are ready to take that gentle walk down towards it.